Wow, such an evocative original recording of a young man in Shrewsbury humming along to himself as he walks along a quiet country trail. I'm really honoured to have been gifted this recording by the Royal Shakespeare Company themselves. So thank you so much. Hello and welcome back to the final couplet with me, Theo Cowan. Here we are again, another week, another Shakespeare sonnet. Last week we looked, of course, at Sonnet 12, and now we're entering the teens. Or is it more the tweens? Is tween still a teenager? I don't know. Anyway, this is Shakespeare's teenage years, so maybe we can expect something new, because we all know that the sonnets align with the age of Shakespeare. So obviously Sonnet 1 he wrote when he was 1 year old, 4 he was 4, and so on and so forth. So you can really see them advance. So now 13, I'm thinking maybe sort of teenage angst will come into play. Yeah, exciting. Anyway, let's have a listen to Sonnet 13, shall we? Sonnet 13. Oh, that you were yourself, but, love, you are no longer yours than you yourself here live. Against this coming end you should prepare, and your sweet semblance to some other give. So should that beauty which you hold in lease find no determination, then you were yourself again after yourself's decease. When your sweet issue your sweet form should bear, who lets so fair a house fall to decay, which husbandry in honour might uphold against the stormy gusts of winter's day and barren rage of death's eternal cold? Oh, none but unthrifts. Dear my love, you know, you had a father. Let your son say so. Ooh, that's a juicy one. That's a juicy one. A bit of a mic drop moment there at the end from Shakespeare. The original mic drop was done by William Shakespeare in Sonnet 13. Wow. Also, it's getting quite personal, this one, I think. You know, we've touched on this in the past where he sort of addresses John directly, and this is, you know, he's saying love, my love, and a few times, and that's quite interesting. I think it's getting more personal. Maybe we're coming to the end of these sonnets now that are all directed at John having a child. I don't know. We can always hope. Anyway, let's work out what the hell he was going on about, shall we? So we start with, oh, that you were yourself, but, love, you are no longer yours than you yourself here live. And that translates to, oh, how I wish you were yourself, but, love. I like how he says love. And what does he mean by love there? You know, is he literally saying my love, you know, to John? Is he sort of confessing to John that he loves him there, or is it just an affectionate love? Is it a romantic love? We don't know. But interesting that he uses it. I think he's used it once before in the sonnets, but this is used it twice in this one. It's quite personal. I mean, I guess we still say, I know if I go down to the shop, someone will say, "You're right, my love." So I guess maybe it's that sort of way that he's using it. Anyway, enough about that. So he says, but my love, no longer yours than you yourself here live. So you'll only last, your identity in you will only last as long as you're alive. Gainst this coming end you should prepare, and your sweet semblance to some other give. So you should be making preparations for your death, all right? And the main preparation for death is to pass on your beauty to someone else, i.e. a child. Your sweet semblance, that's nice, isn't it? Your lovely face. You need to pass on your lovely semblance to your kid. So, your beauty that you hold in lease. God, you've only borrowed that beauty. You've only got it for a little bit. So you've borrowed that beauty for your lifetime. It's quite a good deal, to be fair. You only really need it in life. Doesn't matter what you look like when you're dead, I suppose. Unless, of course, everyone can look at me. You've got a see-through grave. You've got a see-through coffin. Maybe they had that back in Shakespeare's time. So you do need to look good after death. Not for me to say. Anyway, that way, you've only borrowed your beauty. And it wouldn't need to end if you pass on your beauty to your kid. It'll live on. Then you were yourself again after yourself's decease, when your sweet issue your sweet form should bear. So again, same thing really. So, when you die, your lovely looks would be refreshed, renewed by having a child, because your child would still be alive and they'd look like you. It's very egotistical, isn't it, all this? So desperate. What if he's one of those, what if he has a kid and the kid looks nothing like him? What if the kid's, dare I say, ugly? That would be an absolute travesty. What would Shakespeare say then? In 10 years' time, he makes John have a kid. John has a kid, and Shakespeare looks at him and goes, oh no. Not a looker. Not a looker at all. He hasn't really thought this through, has he? Who lets so fair a house fall to decay, which husbandry in honour might uphold against the stormy gusts of winter's day and barren rage of death's eternal cold? Notice how I went up at the end there, just because I realised that there was a question mark. Classic reading of Shakespeare, that, isn't it? Just realising towards the end that there's a question mark and going, cold? Death's eternal cold? Anyway, what does this mean? This means, who would let such a lovely house, comparing John to a house. He likes to do that sometimes, doesn't he? Compare people to houses. And I think in a couple of sonnets ago, he was comparing him to a roof that needed repairing. Anyway, so he's saying, who would let a lovely house decay when it needs to be maintained? It needs maintenance to make it survive stormy winter. So winter's cold and stormy winds that could knock it down, and of course the death. Don't really get that one, because he's sort of using the analogy of a house, but then he's saying you need to maintain the house to stop it from winter, and then we're still in the analogy, and then he says, and from death's rage. But does death have a go at houses? I don't know. Not sure about that one. And now the final couplet. Oh, none but unthrifts, dear my love, you had a father, let your son say so. And that's great, I think. A real strong ending. He finally found his form in Sonnet 13. So we're still on the house analogy, and he's saying, only an irresponsible person, spender, unthrifts, only an irresponsible spender could do that. You, my love, again, my love, my dear my love. So again, using the my love. And then he says, you had a father, remember that? Let your son be able to say the same. Mic drop. Or indeed, at the time it probably wasn't a mic, but maybe a pint of beer or something. So he's holding that and then he just drops that on the floor. And everyone goes, what are you doing? He says, it's a beer drop. I've just delivered an absolute banger of a sonnet, so it should be punctuated by a beer drop. Get with it. So, that is the meaning of Sonnet 13. We're getting a bit of a different flavour in this one. Two my loves and love being dropped by Shakespeare. What is the meaning behind those? Is it just saying my love, or is it really saying you are my love? And a few things about dying and having to have a kid, and then a few classic Shakespeare housing analogies. So that's good to have those back. But an interesting one for sure. So, where does this fall into our story? If you remember last week, Shakespeare had decided to go to the Nag's Head to read Sonnet 12 to Gilbert, a patron of the pub. So that is where we left off. Let's find out what happens next. Shakespeare finishes reading Sonnet 12 to Gilbert. Gilbert is wide-eyed. He looks around. Shakespeare says, well, what are you going to do now? Gilbert slowly stands. And he says, I'm going to have a kid. I'm going to do it. And Shakespeare says, hurrah! And everyone else in the pub says, hurrah! Gilbert's having a kid. Gilbert's having a kid. And Gilbert gets on a table and does a little jig. And everyone claps along. And he says, just one thing, I do need to find a woman to have a kid with. And Shakespeare says, no matter. You'll find a woman, don't worry about it. The point is, I've persuaded you to have a kid. And everyone cheers again. And Shakespeare goes to the bar and has another 5 pints of mead. After he's finished his 5th pint, he leaves the Nag's Head and runs home as fast as he can. He's got a skip in his step again because he knows his sonnets are good, and he is going to go home and write the best sonnet yet. He gets in through the front door and he calls out, wife? No response. He goes into the bedroom. She's not there. He goes into the kitchen. She's not there. Oh well, I guess she's out. And he goes up to his little writing room and pens Sonnet 13, which will include his real feelings about John. It will be personal, but will also implore him to have a kid. He finishes writing. He puts down his big quill and realises he's run out of ink. Note to self, get more ink. Anyway, he leaves his writing room and runs down into the street. He's giddy. He's never been this excited. Apart from the time he got to play the part of Juliet in Romeo and Juliet at the Globe Theatre. That was a good time. He runs down the road to John's house. It's quite a long run and he's getting pretty sweaty. It's a hot day in London town. Eventually he arrives. His garters are drenched in sweat. He knocks on the door. He's left waiting for some time. A few minutes go by. He knocks again. Maybe John hasn't heard. Another few minutes go by. He knocks once more. John eventually opens the door. He's in a state of undress and is red-faced and sweaty. He holds the door ajar so Shakespeare can't look in, and he whispers, I'm with someone at the moment, Shakespeare. Can you come back? And Shakespeare says, shh, 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 shh. Tell them it's carol singers. And Bill says, What? What do you mean? He says, Go on, shout back into the house and say it's carol singers. And John says, It's July. What are you talking about, Bill? And Bill says, Just tell them it's carol singers, all right? And John sighs and says, It's carol singers. Don't worry, I'll be back soon. There's a muffled response. Shakespeare can't quite hear it. Shakespeare sees a lute player walking past behind him, and he grabs him by the scruff of the neck and says, Do you know carols? And the lute player says, What carols? Carols? And Shakespeare says, Yeah, Christmas carols. Do you know them? He says, I can give them a go. He says, Good, start playing them. Don't worry, I'll pay you, just start playing them. And this lute player starts playing all of the classic Christmas carols, Jingle Bells and the likes. And Shakespeare starts scribbling frantically on some parchment that he has. And John says, What the hell are you doing, Shakespeare? He says, Just give me a second, I'm just writing something. And John says, This is crazy. What am I watching? Eventually Shakespeare finishes writing on all of these bits of parchment. And he says, Don't say anything. Just read these. And as the lute plays in the background, Shakespeare holds up the bits of parchment that slowly fall to the ground one by one. The parchment makes up, of course, Sonnet 13, which reads, Sonnet 13. Oh, I wish you were yourself, but, my love, you are only yourself for as long as you live. You should prepare yourself for your inevitable death and pass on your sexy appearance to someone else. That way, your beauty, which you've only been lent, by the way, will live on forever. Even if you died, your hot body will be renewed in your kids. Who would let a nice house fall apart and not maintain it to withstand winter's stormy winds and the barren anger of death? Only an extravagant idiot would do that, my love. You had a dad. Let your son be able to say the same. And there we go. Another episode down. Another sonnet about having children. Find out what happens next week in Sonnet 14 and the continuation of our thrilling story. Until then,